The Buddha's radical mental map. What if the opposite is true? I once read the true story of a woman who'd gone through a really bad period in her mind. Then she got out through a neurotic breakthrough. In other words, the neurosis she was in simply broke. What enabled her to make it break was that whatever thought was hounding her mind, driving her crazy, she would ask herself, what if the opposite is true? I was struck by this story because it reminded me of a point that Ajaan Lee made one time, saying that when you gain an insight in your meditation, you have to ask yourself, to what extent is the opposite true? In other words, you have to circumscribe some limits around your thoughts so that they don't totally possess your mind. Think about the Buddha. There were only 2 of his teachings that he said were categorically true and beneficial across the board. One was the principle that you should develop skillful qualities of the mind and abandon unskillful ones. The other was the 4 Noble Truths. That's it. Those are the only teachings that he said are categorically true and beneficial. There were lots of other things he taught. Either they fit into the 2 principles and so are part of the categorical teachings, like the 7 factors for awakening. Those are basically part of the Noble Eightfold Path, which comes under the 4 Noble Truths. Or else they're true, but beneficial only part of the time. These include many of the other teachings that are widely associated with the Buddha, like the 3 characteristics or 3 perceptions, one of his greatest insights. He showed by the way he taught these things that sometimes they're beneficial and sometimes they're not, even though they're true all the time. Not every truth is beneficial for applying in every case. When you're trying to get the mind into concentration and you're thinking about how things are inconstant, stressful, not self, if you apply those perceptions to the concentration itself, it's hard to put forth the effort to really make the concentration as constant as possible. Yet you need that state of mind to be constant in order to see things clearly. Truth with boundaries. I read something very strange the other day. Someone saying that you can't really analyze a state of concentration while you're in it, because directed thought and evaluation can't see directed thought and evaluation. But why not? The whole point of getting the mind into concentration is that it's a transparent state where it can observe itself very clearly. If you couldn't observe yourself while you were in concentration, what good would it be for gaining insight into the mind? How would you even know that the first jhana had directed thought and evaluation, pleasure, rapture, and singleness of preoccupation? You know these states are there because you can observe them yourself. To get into those states, though, requires that for the time being, you put aside the 3 perceptions or that you apply them only to other things, to anything that would get you out of concentration. As for the concentration itself, you try to make as constant as you can, as pleasurable as you can, and under as much control as you can manage. I know someone else who complained about concentration practice, saying that it requires right effort, and effort requires a strong sense of self because you're going to be struggling and battling. This person decided that he had seen through the Buddha's little joke that you can't really create a state of concentration. You just have to let it come when it's going to come, and otherwise don't make any effort. When you don't make any effort, he said, then there's no sense of self. Well, there's a very strong sense of self right there in making that statement. At the same time, it's amazing how much the last factor of the Noble Eightfold Path, right concentration, gets attacked so much because it's absolutely necessary. The Buddha himself saw it as the heart of the path. Every other factor, he said, was its requisite or its support, and because it's one of the categorical teachings, anything that would get in the way of getting the mind into concentration, you've got to put aside until the concentration is ready. Solid and steady. Then you start taking it apart, and that's when the 3 perceptions get applied to the concentration itself. So even the three perceptions have their time and place to be used. In other times and places, you've got to block them. It's good to think about this when you find yourself obsessed with a particular thought. Have you found the fifth noble truth? If it's driving you crazy, obviously it's not. That means it has to have some boundaries. You've got to figure out where the boundaries are to this truth you've got. The things that drive you crazy may have some truth to them, but it's only partial. Remember, every perception is only partial. It's like a sketch. Every image of the world that you have in your mind has to leave out a lot of the details, like a map. You use a map because it's useful for certain purposes, and you want to make sure that as far as those purposes are concerned, it's informative and accurate. But if you have too much information in the map, or if you're holding on to the wrong map, the map actually gets in the way. A map is a sketch of the world. You have maps for roads, you have maps for the geological formations, you have maps for oil deposits. Depending on what you want, use the map designed for that purpose. That's if you've got an accurate map. There are other maps, though, that are total garbage, so think of your own perceptions as being that way as well. Whatever you think is going to be, at best, just a sketch. You want to make sure that the sketch is accurate and that it's actually giving you the details you need to know for your purposes. There's an analysis someone once did of different recipes, all for the same dish. He was pointing out that some people who write recipes are really good at figuring out where you're going to have a problem, and they address that problem. They also figure out where you can probably figure things out on your own, so they don't need to explain those steps. This is why some cooks are better at writing recipes than others, because they not only know what they're doing, but they also know when other people would have problems or ask questions. So think of your thoughts as recipes. Think of your thoughts as maps. To what extent are the recipes useful? To what extent are they not? And how far does their truth go? This is an important principle that you want to take to heart. If you have a mind that tends to go to extremes and get obsessed with one particular idea, you're really going to have trouble when insights start arising in your concentration. Something comes up and you put the stamp of 100% truth on it, and you start riding it around in areas where it really doesn't belong. So it's useful to have that question. To what extent is this insight true, and to what extent is the opposite true? When you don't see both sides, you're dealing only with half-truths, and maybe not even a half-truth. This principle is called guarding the truth. When you have ideas, you have to ask yourself, where do they come from? And how far are they true? You have to gain a sense of their limitations. Even with things that come up as insights in the meditation, and you say, this comes directly from my experience. Maybe you're approaching it with a map that's going to make you emphasize certain details and forget others. This applies to insights in your meditation. To say nothing of your thoughts as you go through the day and start getting obsessed with something. You need the tools for getting yourself out, for breaking the shell around that thought, so that you can escape from it, so that you can be outside the thought and not totally consumed by it. So when you're obsessed with a certain thought and you're convinced that it really has to be true, ask yourself, have you found the fifth noble truth? The obvious answer is no. In that case, you can't really believe it 100%. You've got to find out where that other percentage is, the percentage where it's not true or not beneficial. Focus your attention there, and that helps get you out. Right speech, inside and out. In the Buddha's description of the path, after he establishes the principles of right view and right resolve, he goes into right speech. Right view focuses you on the issue of suffering and what can be done to put an end to suffering. Right resolve deals with the ways that you make up your mind that you're going to follow the path. You'll try to put aside your sensual obsessions, put aside ill will, put aside thoughts of harmfulness. Then you've got to focus on your speech, as this is a primary place where you're going to be training the mind, because you're dealing both with their external chatter and your internal chatter. In a lot of ways, it's easier to do a lot of harm with your mouth than it is with your body. With a few words, you can give people wrong views, make them feel miserable, break people apart, and waste people's time. A waste of time is a real shame. As the Buddha said, you can die at any time. Suppose you spent your last day dealing in frivolous chatter, and then the big one came, the earthquake that's going to knock everything down. And your last thoughts will be what a total waste that last day was. So you want to make sure that when you open your mouth, you're actually following the path. You're keeping your mouth on the path. The Buddha's own test for whether something was worth saying or not was, 1. Is it true? If it's not true, forget about it. 2. If it's true, is it beneficial? Does this really help somebody? In other words, do you know what you're talking about? And do you know that this actually will be helpful for them? There was one time when I was talking with another young monk in Thailand and sounding forth on something. This was very early on in my career. I was saying, I think it's like this, I think it's like that. Ajaan Lee happened to be walking past, and he said, well, if all you do is think about it, you don't really know. So why are you talking about it? Why are you cluttering up other people's minds with your opinions? So try to restrict your speech to what you know is true, and you know really will benefit the other person. Even then, you have to ask a third question, which is this the right time and place for this? Because sometimes things can be true and beneficial, but if it's the wrong time, the full benefits won't come. If the person's in a wrong mood, or you've got the wrong group of people, there are all kinds of things you've got to watch out for when you say something. Especially when you're a community of people practicing together, you want to make sure your speech is actually helping, not only your path, but also theirs. Because sometimes things may be true and beneficial, but it's not the right time. Ajaan Lee once said that if the people you're talking to are not ready to hear what you have to say, even if it's great Dhamma, if it has nothing to do with what their actual practice is right here and now, then it's idle chatter. It's talk about the practice over there someplace else. It's not really focused on what people need to do right now. You have to be careful about that. We're here to protect one another's practice, to encourage one another's practice. It helps to have people sitting together here in the room. Sometimes when you're sitting alone, it's very easy to say, well, that's enough for now. And then you get up well before the time you'd originally determined. But if everybody's here for the hour, we're all here for the whole hour. There's a certain power that comes when we are practicing together. So you don't want to dissipate that power during the rest of the day. Each time you open your mouth, you're disturbing someone else's quiet. You want to make sure that when you do disturb their quiet, it's for a good purpose. Otherwise, we become enemies of one another's practice. So, keep the Buddha's 3 tests in mind each time you open your mouth. Ajaan Lee's test was always, is this necessary? If it's not, you don't have to bother. We're afraid that if we're quiet, people will think bad things about us. But that's not always the case. I know a lot of people from my past who were very quiet, and I thought that because they were quiet, they were very observant and very circumspect. But then they opened their mouths and destroyed that impression. Particularly here, we're in a community where people are trying to practice. When you're quiet, people will understand, this person's trying to be quiet. It's not that you're stuck up or unfriendly. You're here to meditate. If you feel pressure from other people to be friendly and chatty, well, remember that that's not what you're here for. You're here to work on your own mind. A similar principle applies to internal chatter. You find the mind chatting away about all kinds of things. Attitudes about yourself, attitudes about the practice. You particularly have to be wary of attitudes that tear you down. We were talking earlier today about low self-esteem and how sometimes that's the mind's way of sabotaging itself. If you lower your expectations, you feel that less is going to be demanded of you. You don't have to put out so much effort. It's basically an excuse for laziness. We may have picked up some ideas from other people who have looked down on us for one reason or another, but you have to ask yourself, Why do you let yourself internalize that? Because you know some people who, even though the whole society dumps on them, or one large segment of society dumps on them, don't let it get to them. They make it part of their determination. They're not going to allow that attitude to infect their own. But then there are other people who just allow other people's low opinion of them to weigh them down. So it's not inevitable that if people are looking down on you, you're going to have low self-esteem. If there's part of you that's willing to take on that low opinion for one reason or another, you have to look into why. This is particularly important for you as a meditator because it's in meditation that you begin to realize more and more the choices you have. You're learning to step back from the different voices in your mind and ask yourself, do I really believe that? Do I really believe that now? Maybe I believed that sometime in the past, but do I have to believe it now? Well, number. This applies especially to the attitudes that make you feel you can't do the practice, or you're not up to it, or you allow yourself to get down. You have a bad day in the meditation, and all of a sudden that becomes the whole story of your life as a meditator. Well, stop and think. You've had good meditations, and you've had bad meditations. It's a normal part of training the mind. The mind is a complex phenomenon. If we were to draw a chart of its progress, I don't know anybody whose progress would be just up, 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 up all the time. It has its peaks and its troughs. Part of your stamina is learning how to deal with the troughs so that you don't get discouraged. At the same time, you don't want to become heedless when things are peaking, because you know the nature of a peak. From there, you just go down. How do you turn that peak into a plateau or a gentle rise that goes still further up? You don't do it by getting complacent, so you have to look at the kind of chatter going on in your mind to figure out when to come down hard on yourself and when to be more consoling. When something comes up in the mind, a good test is always, to what extent is the opposite true? And when would the fact of the opposite sometimes being true be a useful thing to think about? After all, there are very few things that are true 100% across the board. As the Buddha said, there are only two things he saw as categorical truths. One was the distinction between what is skillful and unskillful behavior, that skillful behavior should be developed and unskillful behavior abandoned. And the other was the Four Noble Truths. The truths about yourself as a meditator don't fall into those categories. In other words, the question of whether you're a good meditator or a bad meditator is never true across the board. You can be sitting here and creating all kinds of narratives about where you are in the chart of your progress, measuring it in different ways. In some, it might be part of a nice rise as you head into the future. In others, it might be a horrible chasm facing you, or you might be down in the dumps. It depends on which things you're going to focus on and how you stitch them together to make a narrative. Learn how to make narratives that are actually helpful, that keep you heedful but don't let you get discouraged in the practice. These principles of internal chatter are important, both while you're here at the monastery and when you leave. Because here, at least, there's a very strong set of values aimed at the practice. As you go someplace else, you'll find that the values are very different. You have to be careful about what you internalize, what attitudes you pick up. Remind yourself, you do have the choice, and be very careful not to take unskillful voices outside and make them your own voices inside. Try to keep that internal conversation true and beneficial and timely. If any members of the committee are out of order, let them know. Because this business of verbal fabrication inside the mind, as Ajaan Lee pointed out, is the most important issue on the path. It can do the most damage, but it can also be the most helpful. It can be helpful in the sense that it reminds you of what right view is, and in that way, it's an essential part of mindfulness. As you're working on your concentration, it helps you to notice when things are going off course, and you can direct them back. But be careful. Something that's useful like this if you don't make sure that it stays skillful, can also be very harmful. So do your best to sort out this internal chatter and keep it focused on issues that are really important and really beneficial to your quest for happiness. This is how right speech translates into the other factors of the path that follow on it. You talk yourself into doing the right things. You talk yourself into maintaining right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. It's an important function of the mind. You know what's right, you know what the path is, but there will be lots of different parts of the mind that will fight or pull off in other directions. The factor of right internal speech is what keeps everybody in line.